Hi, I'm Tammy. The purpose of the Tammy North Show is to give high achievers actionable content to propel themselves to senior leadership while living a balanced life. Women leading within corporations and government organizations who want to perform with authenticity at the senior executive level have found their community. Hi, today we're going to talk about Corporate Stockholm Syndrome and why people follow toxic leaders. And if you should find yourself in one of these Corporate Stockholm Syndrome situations, what you can do to deal with it or get away from it, and then also how you can ensure that you yourself don't become a person who's creating that type of atmosphere for others so that you don't become a toxic leader. I read an article several years back from Psychology Today when I was thinking about a specific workplace situation that I was actually in, where it seemed that there was one person who had a cult-like hold over the rest of the organization. And in my opinion, it was to the detriment of the customer. And that customer, which to me, I'm in the Navy, so the fleet, the sailors, the officers on the ships, those are my number one focus. And that was my number one passion. The hold that this one person had over the organization also seemed to be at the detriment of all the employees of the same organization. And I remember explaining this leader to other people, and I used words like, it's like he's holding them hostage. It's like they can't even see that they're stuck. And when I said those words, I actually thought of Stockholm Syndrome. It went through my mind. So I Googled Stockholm Syndrome and workplace, and I found one article. So here we are 6 or 7 years later, and now when I Google this topic, that article is still the main one article that comes up from Psychology Today. And there's other information on it, but I think that it's an overall understudied area within the workplace. But I do believe that it seems to be a real phenomena in many organizations. So let me give you a refresher about what Stockholm Syndrome is in general, just to lay a foundation for today's discussion. On the encyclopedia website, Britannica.com, I found this definition that Stockholm Syndrome is a psychological response where a captive begins to identify closely with his or her captors, as well as with their agenda and their demands. The name of Stockholm Syndrome came from a botched bank robbery in Stockholm, Sweden in 1973. And during that time, 4 employees of the bank were being held hostage in a vault, and they were held for 6 days. During that standoff, a bond actually developed between the hostages and the captor. During a phone call with the Swedish Prime Minister, one of the hostages actually said that she trusted her captors, but she was more afraid she would die if the police came and conducted an assault on the building. So essentially she was saying she trusted the people holding her hostage, who caused the entire situation in the first place, more than she trusted law enforcement who were coming to save her. And really, when you think about it, it's the survival instinct that's at the heart of Stockholm Syndrome. Victims start to sympathize with their captor. Even though they are being mistreated, the captor controls all their basic needs, controls them completely. Food, water, shelter, they're the source of the punishment, they're the source of any types of rewards. And in this situation, a hostage actually becomes hypervigilant to the needs and demands of their captors, and they're basically trying to make psychological links between their captor's happiness and their own. If the person keeping them hostage is happy, then they will be happier too, because they'll be safer, or maybe they'll be less likely that something's going to go wrong. So they start to make actual psychological links between their happiness and their captor's happiness. So then not only does that positive bond develop, but also a negative attitude on the behalf of the captive toward police or other authorities who come and threaten the captor-captive relationship, because as the police get closer, has SWAT teams near, then the captor becomes more agitated. The situation gets very stressful. The captive or the hostage then believes they have a higher chance of dying, that they become in great fear for their own life at that point. It's very uncertain what's going to happen. Perhaps the police are going to be able to make a difference, but if the police can't get in, now the captor, who still has complete control over this person's personal life right now, if the police cannot remove him, now there's a higher chance that the hostage themselves will be killed. I'm sure there's a lot deeper psychology that goes into it than just that, but that's essentially what Stockholm Syndrome is. So then it almost gets to a point where the hostage is afraid of being rescued. In the workplace, you might see this as somebody who works for a toxic person or who really wants this one toxic person to be happy. So they push against anything that might make that one boss, supervisor, leader, whatever, in the chain of command upset. So we don't want them to be upset. So we're going to try really hard to get everybody else to do the right thing just so we don't make this person unhappy. And they push against anything that might upset the boss, even when it's bad for themselves, even when it's bad for other employees, even when it's bad bad for the organizational mission, and even when it's bad for the customer. As long as the boss is happy at any cost, they believe that they are better off and they'll survive another day to fight again. According to the Psychology Today article I read, it was written in 2014, but corporate Stockholm Syndrome can be defined as employees of a business beginning to identify with and being deeply loyal to an employer who mistreats them. And in this situation, it's defined as demanding overly long hours, ignoring the well-being and emotional needs of the employee. And that's kind of very general. Think about this. As with the captor-captive dynamic, the employer is almost in complete control of an employee's fate. When you're talking about paychecks, bonuses, time off, promotions, the fear of being laid off, the fear of being fired, not to mention the opportunities for other plum assignments, perks such as travel benefits, access to or exclusion from the inner circle of knowledge. Each of these rewards and punishments can be doled out by the boss for the purpose of manipulation in this situation. Oftentimes, all those things should be used for the good of the mission or to possibly reward good behavior, or when somebody is particularly being highly valuable. There's a lot of ways to reward employees. And then there's also ways to discover that employees are underperforming and then to encourage them and to help them improve in their work situation. But in this case, all of the things I just discussed are not being used in a proper leadership manner. They are literally being used to control, to manipulate, and to bring fear to the workforce. And no matter how many times I tell you that you are worthy simply because you exist, many of you do derive a large amount of your own self-worth from your work and your career life. This exact correlation between work and career and worthiness is one thing that will put you at high risk for experiencing corporate Stockholm Syndrome if you stay in one certain toxic work environment for long enough. The odds are, if you've been in this situation for a very long time, that you don't even realize how bad it has gotten, or you might think that there's no hope of you ever really escaping it. That is, if you ever decide to admit it to yourself, how bad your situation really has become. So I guess that's the question. Are you in a corporate Stockholm Syndrome situation? Well, ask yourself these questions. Are you emotionally attached to your company? Now, being emotionally attached on its own is not a bad thing. You can really care about your company. You can care about your bosses. You can care about your coworkers. In fact, in many cases, that situation will enhance your work experience and everybody else around you. But just answer the question, are you emotionally attached? Yes or no? And then let's go on to the rest of the questions. Because then how you answer the rest of these compared to if you're emotionally attached will really, I think, bring it clear if you're there or not. Does your position at this company negatively impact your own emotional health? Do you call in sick more often? Do you actually feel drained, extremely stressed, beat down, exhausted? I mean, there's a list of things that usually come when you're in a really horrible work situation. Are you having any of those experiences? Does your employer treat you poorly? So this is your supervisor or your general chain of command. Even though you work your butt off, do they disregard your thoughts? Do they talk viciously or angrily? Do they scream in meetings? Do they overreact to slightly negative situations? These are all some things to consider. If yes, if you feel like you're being treated poorly, maybe you even go and you talk to your spouse or your family or your friends and they think you're being treated poorly. Do you then justify or rationalize why that person's treating you so poorly? Maybe you even take blame for it sometimes. You might also say things like, well, that person is so essential. Well, that person is so knowledgeable. It's for the greater good. It's much better for the organization that that person's here. Yes, I know that that person treats me very poorly, but they are the only ones that know what to do. It's better for the customer, even if it isn't. This person's not always this way. Do you get angry or defensive when this employer's actions are questioned by somebody on the outside, even on the outside of the circle? So it could be an external organization that is giving you feedback about this leader. It could be people in other departments or divisions. If you are in the inner circle, it could be somebody within your own team or division who isn't in the inner circle clique. But if anybody that is external to what you feel is going on says anything negative about this leader and you start to defend them and get defensive about it, just notice that. When somebody else actually tells you you are in a toxic situation, do you go into complete denial? Does your company seem to tolerate it or even encourage other employees to verbally abuse each other when somebody's not being a team player? I read a book actually a couple times a while back, probably like 5 years ago or so, called The 5 Dysfunctions of a Team by Patrick Lincione. He's awesome. All of his books he writes in fable form, and he has several different books on all kinds of topics that are awesome. And the one, 5 Dysfunctions of a Team, is so fantastic. And one of the things I got out of that book is that, and I haven't read it in a long time, so I'm totally paraphrasing, but teams should be able to meet. They should be able to openly discuss. They should be able to give feedback both to the team leader or to the boss. They should be able to give feedback to each other. They should even be able to have slightly heated conversations, heated conversations where one person's like, no, I completely disagree with what you're saying there on this basis. And you can discuss things metrics based, you can have reasons, and the main thing is not to attack each other, but you can just have very intense thoughts on any type of idea that you're working on. But then you walk out of the meeting and you're like, okay, nice to see you, Jill. Goodbye, Mary. And you go on your way. Even though you might have just been having an intense conversation, that's an example of an open idea sharing culture, a culture where people are free to share their information and nobody has fear of reprisal. If, on the other hand, you're in a meeting and nobody's talking because everybody's waiting for the boss to say something, and then any idea that somebody has, somebody else says, oh, we need to go ask this boss, and everybody's afraid to make a decision without getting the approval from that one person, then that's what I'm talking about. Are people afraid to make a decision, even very small decisions, without deferring to the one person? As I was just saying, it seems like that one person has all the power, and even the most minute decisions, some people will not move forward without going to ask. Do you think that person, if they are so senior that they have hundreds of people working for them, that they have time to approve every little decision you make? What you should do if you need that kind of approval is get several decisions into a brief, schedule some time with them, and just go knock them out. Some of the decisions you can just make on your own and then let that person know you made the decision. And odds are it's going to be fine. And if it's not, then that's something to notice. Is loyalty to this one person seen as absolutely everything? Not only to that person, the boss with the power, but to the most entrenched followers of this person. So if you don't just absolutely bow down, do you get excluded in even some of the other team members on your team who are fully in the circle? Do you get excluded from their circles? Just notice that. And even though the happiness of this person, and if this person approves and is satisfied, even though that means absolutely everything to the most loyal followers, does it seem that the well-being of those employees is not important at all to this leader? That this leader doesn't generally care about all the employees, not even his most loyal followers? Just notice that. Are there company provided perks, maybe awards? Are they provided only to the most highly loyal smaller inner circle? And if that's the case, just notice, does it seem that these rewards are doled out with some sort of manipulation in mind? After all, a key aspect of inducing Stockholm Syndrome is that the more powerful party provides treats and kindness and all of that to the less powerful party. And when these come from the same source, the goodness and the negativity, any kind of punishment, you could be fired. Have you ever seen this person fire somebody? Do they make a big point of firing people in front of other people? When you have these types of situations in the same person, then the psychological warfare of the lesser party or the followers can be much more easily controlled. So if you're working under a leader who has direct control of all the positive and negative outcomes for your career, and they are using them in a manipulative way as I just described, then you could be in a corporate Stockholm Syndrome situation. If you're experiencing these symptoms, you are at a high risk for significant emotional trauma. Spending your days under psychological pressure in this type of an environment is extremely unhealthy. Not to mention that it's harmful for your friends and your family and anybody who's going to find themselves on the receiving end of your anger whenever you have an opportunity to vent. I mean, inevitably, you're going to find a place to release all the pent-up anger and rage at the situation that you're feeling that you might be blocking when you're at work trying to make that person happy. But then you will come back out of that situation into a place where you have more control, and you're going to usually focus your anger and you're going to vent at the least powerful and the least responsible targets, which could be your own kids, your spouse, your best friends, your neighbor, the guy driving down the road who's just trying to get home to his family too. This is why, if you recognize yourself in this discussion today, that I recommend you find ways to take back your power. Don't worry, I got you. You know that I'm not going to have this discussion with you without giving you some ideas about how you can get to a better position. It will be hard to break the cycle if you're deeply entrenched, especially in a culture that prizes loyalty, work, and wealth over your emotional health. But these abusers don't deserve your loyalty loyalty. They are not worth your life and your joy. So what are the signs that a leader is toxic? If you feel like you're in a corporate Stockholm Syndrome situation, you probably already know who the captor is, depending on where you are in the organizational structure. If you're brand new to the organization, it might just be coming clear and you might not be sure. It might not be perfectly obvious, but if you've been there a while, you probably know. But let's just go through this just to be sure. Here's some signs to pay attention to. A leader might be toxic if they never make a decision and they're extremely inconsistent. They change what they want, they move the goalposts, they never think it's good enough, no matter how clear it is, how much data it backs it up, and no matter how many other people agree. This is just one way they keep themselves feeling like they are the expert. And they make others feel less worthy or very unsure. They keep people kind of like, I don't know what to do. I don't know what he wants. And you try to make him happy and it's hard. Another way is that they have complete lack of trust for other people. They seem to literally trust nobody. I mean, maybe there is one person or two people that they might trust. And then there might be like a super small circle that they pretty much trust. And they run 100% of anything that they decide through that circle. They never allow a thought that tiny circle does not agree with to move forward. They actively exclude almost everybody from key information, and they do it in a way so that nobody has the ability to gain the entire picture. They'll talk to these people over here about maybe the money. They'll talk to these people over here about the technical stuff. And they'll talk to these people over here about schedule things, but they won't give one person the entire picture or all the information. They exclude most of the people from all the very important conversations where you could gain a strategic vision. And what that does is limit future potential people who could take their places because it limits the knowledge that's spread across. And therefore, it actually limits the entire organization's growth potential. Another thing a toxic leader does is they will not let other people shine. This is likely driven from some sort of narcissistic perspective on their side, but instead of believing that everybody can and should shine, they don't want anybody to outshine them. So they do everything to block your light. This is really the multiplier diminisher effect. And I talked about this on another podcast in the past. It's a book by Liz Wiseman called Multipliers. If you haven't read it, please go read it. And I'll link the multiplier podcast I did in the show notes here. Toxic leaders have extremely out of control bad habits. They lose their temper. They overreact to minor negative events. They never provide any positive feedback, except very rarely, and then usually only to very specific people. And often they use this praise to manipulate or to control. If they feel like somebody's about to leave the team, then they might give them positive feedback in order to pull them back in, for example. Toxic leaders often have a lack of openness to lifelong learning and innovative ideas. They have a strong feeling that they already know everything they need to know. It doesn't matter if they've been there for 30 years in practically the same job. They have a low desire to attend continuous learning courses. They don't want to go to leadership courses. They don't need an executive coach. They don't want or believe customer feedback. They truly believe that they are smarter than every single person around them, including active users of the products they create. And they'll block almost every opportunity to innovate because they simply cannot see another way. They have a complete lack of ability to see a better world. Another thing that's definitely true of many toxic leaders is that they have a complete lack of self-awareness. This is always a problem, self-awareness. Self-awareness, even if with people like me who talk about it all the time or other coaches and leadership trainers, you can actually be a strong believer that people should be self-aware. You can do everything you try to do to be self-aware yourself. And even if you're trying really hard, it's still hard to see your own leadership flaws sometimes. So if you're one of these toxic people and you aren't interested in even trying to learn about yourself or having a coach or going to leadership training and you already have a high opinion of yourself, then imagine that. It's far harder for them to even be aware that they are doing anything wrong. They just think this is the way it is. This is actually one of the best ways a career and life coach can help you. These toxic leaders are really on an extreme end of being not self-aware on the spectrum. And most of us know we need to change some things and we're working on them, even if we have a long way to go. But this toxic type of leader essentially operates the way they always have, and they deeply believe that this is how they got to where they are, and they see zero reason to change. So are there pros and cons to a toxic leader? Often the reason toxic leaders are promoted or hired come from their ability to gain short-term wins. They're able to take a situation and a group of people and they're able to get something done. And in spite of the short-term potential wins, organizational leadership, people above these toxic leaders, really need to be wary of hiring a known toxic leader or keeping a known toxic leader on board. The major downsides of all this will be felt long-term. One thing is talent management will be hard. The super motivated, innovative people who really want to make a difference will leave. Rumors will get around about the culture and new high potential people maybe won't apply. And due to the inability to listen to the team or even to the customer, the only ideas that'll move forward will be the toxic leader's idea. And that will hurt the product. It'll hurt the services of the organization. And then, of course, that being said, it will hurt the entire organization. It's like a cancer that spreads. The people who do stay will often be people who feel like they're riding on the coattails of the leader. And they hope someday, maybe 10 years from now, they will be able to finally get that person's job. They are so emotionally attached and afraid to make a decision without this person's approval that they basically become unable to think for themselves. And this is really a finite mindset. I talk about infinite and finite games. There's a book by Seth Godin, and there's an older book called Finite and Infinite Games. I'll link both those books in the show notes. The older one is very philosophical. It's a philosophical type read. It's pretty interesting. Lots of great thoughts in there. But then the one by Seth Godin, Infinite Games, it's really about finding your purpose. And if you move toward your purpose and something you're very passionate about, then no matter which job you end up in, you'll be happy because you feel like you're doing something for the right reasons. Like in my case, my personal passion is for helping the fleet. I work for the Navy, so I'm trying to help the sailors and the officers every day be able to conduct their missions better. And that is my strong North Star type passion that I have. And because of that, I am always trying to figure out, is this the best thing for the Navy? Is this the best thing for the mission? Is this the best thing for the sailors on the ships? And if I think that somebody's making a decision one way or another, it just gives me a guiding light to help direct the efforts I'm taking. But if your big shining light is like this one job in one organization, then you make decisions for the wrong reasons at that point, because then it becomes focused on you that you're trying to get to this one position, and therefore you try to manipulate things to make that happen. And then you end up often not doing things you would have done for the customer or for the greater mission that would have been right. So these people who stay riding the coattails of this toxic leader, some of them are there with a finite mindset to just eventually be able to take that person's job. And when they stay for that reason, they are very strongly in a win-lose situation. They can either win, maybe they will be the one person who ends up in that job someday, but they can't all end up there. So then most of them are going to lose if that's what they're waiting for. But since they've put so much loyalty and time into this one person and this culture, they've been completely crafted by this leader, and they will likely continue the cycle when they get to that job. This is what they've learned. There's other reasons people stay, but that's one reason right there. We'll talk about other reasons as we keep going through this. So how do you identify these cult-like followers of this leader? The people who are loyal to this leader. These loyal people are one of the key reasons that these toxic leaders are able to remain in place. They sort of form a safety cocoon around them. Think about it. If an organization conducts an investigation because other people are complaining about this leader, or other external stakeholders are complaining, or somebody a few rungs separated from this person complains, that tight circle will be some of the main people that are interviewed to provide details or insight on what happened. But then out of fears for their own job, fear that the leader won't ever be removed, so fear they'll be excluded from the circle if they actually talk about him, they will defend this person. They might even provide dishonest information to protect them. And this is completely driven from their own fear and possibly from their own desire to play that finite game, because they hope that someday they will actually be the person who can replace this toxic leader. Followers of this toxic leader most definitely do have psychological needs that are being met, and that's why they stay. Besides the inner circle needs that I was explaining, some other things are there are psychological needs to have an authority. And this is kind of driven from childhood, the need for authority. And this leader may bring some feeling of safety or reassurance to this people. He tells them what to do. They do what he says. Their responsibility is then removed from the situation. Well, he said that's what I should do, so I'm good to go. There's the psychological need for security. And in this case, the very loyal followers are willing to trade their freedom for security. They have no autonomy. They have no autonomy to make their own decisions. They have no autonomy to do anything without this person agreeing. And they've already come to that relationship between the two of them, and they're satisfied with that. So they've given up their freedom and their autonomy for the security they believe they have because this person will keep them on their organization. They have the psychological need to feel special and the need to belong. If you're pulled into an inner circle, you feel special. Even in the very act of being there, though, you are excluding others and you're hurting the organization if the inner circle isn't there for a good purpose. There's a difference between a trusted advisor that speaks openly and honestly with a leader and an inner circle that basically tell him he looks great. The emperor, you look great in these clothes, even though he's walking around without any clothes on at all. Those are two different kinds of situations. There's a psychological fear of ostracism, and that is the fear that if you report this leader or if you participate in any investigation that might be going on about this leader, that you will be excluded and they will remain in place. And when they remain in place, they will push you out of the circle. There is also the fear of being powerless to change the situation. So there's the fear that there is nothing you can do to unseat this person. And so therefore nobody tries. There's all types of rumors of other people who have tried and it hasn't worked. And so therefore everybody quits trying. And there are some reasons that people stay a follower until they don't. And often they won't say one single thing in that organization. They'll just keep their head down. They'll do their work. They're probably not in the inner circle, or maybe they are, but they don't say anything until they leave, until they find a better position for themselves. And in their exit interview, they will finally complain. And the reason is they think nothing will be done about it. If they complain earlier, nothing's going to be done about it. The people who complain will be punished. New people aren't sure exactly what's going on, and they're definitely not secure enough to complain. And there is this fact. It is not the role of an employee to get rid of the manager. It shouldn't be that way in a company. It's the role of the executive leadership, of the very senior leadership. It's a toxic CEO. Then it is the role of the board. But there is somebody more senior in every situation who can hear the rumbling and then decide to take decisive action to correct the issue. So if there is one person in an organization where even if they seem kind of small, there's complaint, and there's kind of like little blips of complaints all over the radar about this one person. And then every time there's an investigation and you do a narrow investigation on this one, unsubstantiated, you do a narrow investigation on this one, unsubstantiated, you do a narrow investigation on this one, unsubstantiated, but it keeps popping up over and over, it has the very top of the organization, you're probably neglecting to see the amount of impact this is having on your organization. I think a good book to read in that situation is Good to Great. And in there, they talk about level 5 leaders and they talk about getting the right people on the bus and the wrong people off the bus. And those two concepts right there, I think would be two great portions of that book, Good to Great, to read. I think it's by Jim Collins. And read that book and apply it to this situation. And the toxic leader, they don't need to be fired necessarily, but they need help. If they can't be rehabilitated, then further action should be taken. Okay, so is it possible that the leader doesn't know that they're toxic? I mean, yes, it is possible, especially because we talked about the self-awareness conversation. It's definitely possible they have no idea, but it's more likely they have some idea. Although I did read an article today from the Harvard Business Review, and it was titled Coaching a Toxic Leader. And it's kind of complex. That was a good article if you want to go Google it. It's very likely that these toxic leaders have had some type of their own psychological trauma at some point, and obviously they haven't dealt with it. But in extreme cases, they may even have a coach or a therapist that they're working with and still be having challenges. Because even that was the point of this article, is that it's actually very hard to coach a very toxic person because it's a delicate walk you have to do with that leader until they have psychological safety enough to really begin to open up and see that they need to change. And that takes a while. And then if the toxic person does rein in their behavior, and they often will when they're being considered for a new promotion, they'll rein it in, they'll listen to the coach because they're very smart. These people are usually very intelligent and they know, oh, I need to kind of modify my behavior so that everybody thinks I'm doing better. And then that's great. But then as soon as they're promoted, they will let all their improvement go and revert to their old ways. It doesn't always happen, but that's one of the fears. So even if you are in a very senior place and you get a coach for one of your toxic leaders and they seem to improve, so you promote them, I would highly encourage you to keep a coach working with them for a longer period of time until they have really fully, at least checking in with them periodically until it's really sure that they have actually adapted. And I do do believe that it is 100% possible for people to change their behavior. Even the most toxic people, it is possible. In some cases, they might need medication, they might be bipolar, there might be some other things going on there, they might need therapeutic work, but it is possible. But it's going to take intense work. And if they truly want to improve, they're going to have to make the decision themselves and commit to it. So what can you do? What can you do if you have a leader like this? If you find yourself in a corporate Stockholm situation? You can do your best to become independent, to think independently, to become courageous and autonomous. That's what I would do. Try to think for yourself. And the more you do think for yourself, the clearer your situation will become. You can make clear goals. I think it is possible that sometimes people are just unhappy at work and they judge a leader unfairly to say they're toxic when really a lot of the work needs to go onto yourself. Make sure that you are doing the work to make sure you're clean and that you are observing the situation with as an objective as a lens as you possibly can. And then just go out there trying to do the best you can every day. And then that will be one of your best survival techniques while you're there. And then you'll grow, you can meet other people. And then when it's appropriate, if this does happen, then please do speak honestly if this person gets investigated. The more people who do, the higher chance the person will receive intervention from their leadership or possibly even be removed if they can't adapt. If you're not comfortable or if you have fear that you will get fired or something, I fully understand that. But even then, try to find an anonymous way to get the information to the people who can do something about it. At least try. I don't think we're quite there where our cultures and our organizations are safe to fully report on many things, sexual assault, sexual harassment, and definitely these kinds of situations. Our organizations aren't 100% there yet, but they're getting better. So try. I'm just going to ask you that. It takes some bravery. But I will say this, it's sort of like, let's say you have a bunch of criminals and there's like 3 people and they did something, they broke the law together and then they get in separate interrogation rooms. If they would all 3 just shut up, then it would be harder for the law enforcement to get them. But because they all tell different stories and they all dime the others out, then they all get sent to jail. All I'm trying to say is that if everybody would just be honest about what's happening, then these people would have no choice but to improve. And I'm not saying these people should be automatically removed or fired. I actually am a low believer on firing people unless they can't be rehabilitated. But in many cases they can. But sometimes they need to be scared to death about, oh, I'm about to lose it all because I'm being a tyrant. And maybe in that instance, what it would take to change. But they aren't going to have that fear if everybody just protects their bad behavior. The thing I decided to do when I was in this situation, I stayed there for quite a while. And I worked very hard and I built up a very strong coalition of my own. This included outside stakeholders. And I did this while I grew my own portfolio of expertise. And I made a point to get as knowledgeable as I possibly could get about a multitude of things. And then when I had an opportunity for a promotion opportunity, a different organization who was very aligned with my passion for our customer, I jumped and it worked. You can see that one thing I was doing that entire time, building up a coalition, including with external people, that what you're really doing is opening up the possibility of new opportunities that you can go to. Because if an organization and the leadership of this person isn't willing to make the change and this person isn't willing to make strong changes, then at some point the change is going to have to come with you. And if you have that infinite mindset where you have a bigger purpose in mind and then you build your expertise such that you only bring new opportunities to yourself, you can still stay aligned with your ultimate purpose and then find an organization or a position to work in that will let you thrive, that will let you grow. And if you're stuck in this situation, there's one good thing I want to say. The culture is changing, especially everything that happened in 2020. There's so many things now that are simply not going to be okay in the workplace. These are things that have been seen as just the way it is over the past 20 to 30 years. But if there is somebody who's truly harming other people in a verbally abusive way, if there's somebody who's clearly breaking laws, or there's somebody who's acting in an unquestionably unethical manner, then please consider being brave enough to say something. But just think about those wonderful, quiet, less brave people who are going to consider to suffer long after you're gone. The people who aren't in the inner circle either. And they're going to be suffering because the leadership's going to stay toxic. But if you were brave enough to say something, you might make all the difference. So what can you do to not become this type of leader? One thing is to ensure that you do have trusted advisors, not an inner circle that protects you, but trusted advisors. People who have the ability to talk openly to you and give you feedback, and then listen to them. Develop some kind of system also for not only your trusted advisors to give you feedback, that little group, but get some other system to get feedback from all your employees. Let them share their thoughts. Allow open dialogue. Put yourself out there in kind of open forums where people can ask you all kinds of questions. Let people send in anonymous feedback to you. Find different ways to get feedback. If you have one-on-one sessions with some of the random employees on your team, then I do recommend having an objective third person available during these feedback sessions for the protection of both you and the employee. That keeps them safe. It keeps you safe. Let them come talk. Depending on what they say, take some actions. Is there something you can do better? Just reflect. Take time at the end of every day to reflect. What did I learn today? What can I do better tomorrow? Come with that kind of mindset, you are going to constantly improve. And then make sure you're managing your work and your life in a way that there is a natural flow as much as that offers you healthy stress release and joy. And then find external third-party people to talk to, such as another successful friend in a different organization, somebody who understands your role and your challenges, an executive coach, a career coach, maybe a mastermind group full of people that are just like you, that you can all kind of bounce things off of each other, and you can get like 5 or 6 people telling you feedback. Then like, here's my situation, here's what my employee said, what do you think? And some of them are gonna be like, yeah, that was really bad. Some people are like, well, here's what I've had that happen and here's what I did. So get people that you can bounce ideas off of. Toxic leadership is very common and it can be difficult to deal with, both as an employee or as an executive leader who has a toxic employee working for you. The key is developing a culture in the organization that, along with achievement, productiveness, innovation, also inspires openness, communication, and collaboration. This requires developing mentorship and coaching programs for high potential people and really listening to the entire team. Monitor everybody, the feedback you're getting for signs that one particular person is becoming like a beacon for complaints. No matter how successful they are, consider getting them intense coaching and mentoring, or take the steps to change your organizational leadership. If this type of behavior is tolerated, it will only inspire others to lead just like this person, and it will begin to spoil the entire organizational culture and the output. The ultimate loser will be the customer. If you're like me and you work in an industry where you're very passionate about your customer, where depending on what you deliver, lives could be on the line, like literal lives of our military service members could be on the line, then there is zero room to let such behavior spread. Take action. You can connect with us on Facebook at Genuine Driven Women, or to learn more about what we offer, check out genuinedrivenwomen.com.